On Christmas Day, Finnish authorities arrested the crew of an oil tanker suspected of sabotaging undersea cables. In response, President of Finland, Alexander Stubb, has held a NATO Baltic Sea summit for countries who are regularly attacked in this way, allegedly coming from Russia. For the Europe conversation, I catch up with Elina Valtonen, the Finnish Minister for Foreign Affairs, and I ask her about the Eagle S tanker. Minister Elina Valtonen, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation. We're here in Helsinki for the Baltic Sea Summit. Can I ask you first to update us on this seized oil tanker, the Eagle S? It was seized by Finland. It's allegedly part of Russia's shadow fleet. Tell us the damage it caused and what the investigation is telling us.
Indeed, on December 25th, the Christmas Day, there was this incident when this suspected vessel cut several cables beneath the Baltic Sea. And indeed, the Finnish authorities were very quick at the scene and seized the vessel. And now we are in the process of investigations, so basically investigating both the vessel and, of course, the crew. I trust our authorities are doing a terrific job also in this.
But what we are hearing is that it's allegedly part of Moscow's shadow fleet, which is problematic. That's something that Finland has been experiencing for the past couple of years, that you have this shadow fleet coming through the Baltic Sea, damaging underwater cables, and also being part of this hybrid war.
Essentially, this is not just a Finnish problem for many reasons. Well, first of all, quite many of the damages we've experienced over the course of the past, I'd say, 18 months in the Baltic Sea area have been influencing directly several coastal states. But as you know, in this interlinked world, if we look at the internet, if we look at effectively data cables, if we look at energy networks, so it is not just the two nodes, the two countries who are affected, but effectively the entire network. So, of course, we are directly experiencing the damage. We are resilient, though. It's not our only cables, not our only energy connections that have been cut through, of course not. But we are also very much responsible for recovering also from these individual cases. And of course, we can't have, our entire infrastructure cut down. That wouldn't be possible or beneficial for Finland or any other country for that matter. But the second thing is, in this regard, we very much need to take into account that the shadow fleet is essentially responsible for transporting illegal oil. So oil against the sanctions. So it is responsible for funding Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. So that is basically the initial reason why the G7 and the European Union have set the oil price cap.
And Finland is one of the only countries that has seized these oil tankers and taken aboard the crew for questioning and investigation. Mm-hmm. Well, is it potentially that these people could end up in prison, for example?
Everything is possible. And again, we are working within the realm of international law. And for instance, all of the maritime agreements, which are very binding, not just to us, but the rest of the world. And that's how we want to keep it, right? So, investigators are doing their job, and then we see after.
Okay, if we want to look at Ukraine, I mean, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, is saying that, right now Europe is safe, but in 4 to 5 years, if we continue the way we are in relation to security and defence, we may not be. And what do you think the EU should do now in relation to defence? Is Finland supportive of much more joint investment in European defence, such as defence bonds, common borrowing and so on?
We would be very well off if all of the NATO countries would commit those 2% and above to their defence. Finland is clearly above the 2%, and we are not even counting our conscription-based army, which operationally and effectively gives us a significant capability in terms of fending off, for instance, traditional invasion. So definitely we need to do more, and we need to do it together. But it would be a great start if everybody started ramping up their defence and deterrence as stipulated by, say, the Wales Agreement.
Yeah, but I mean, let's say from the EU, we're not talking about NATO now, we're talking about the European Union and defence. Now, I know obviously they're completely intertwined, NATO and the EU, but not all countries are in NATO and so on. So from an EU budget perspective.
And not all countries are in the EU.
Exactly,
but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So from an EU point of view, because Finland tends to not be as supportive of extra spending when it comes to the EU budget, is that sort of those taboos off the table now, given the situation we're in?
Let's put it this way, we are not taking anything away from the table, but at the same time, this is very preliminary. We are not, as you're saying, fans of collective funding for issues which should have been taken care of individually by each country. But having said this, I think defense and, or even in broader terms, security, it's a public good. And it's a public good which optimally is produced collectively, not just one individual country in itself. Like we see in this case of the broken cables, right? By definition, the cable runs through or goes from one country to the next in this case. So it is not just a national issue.
In relation to Ukraine, does Finland believe that Ukraine should be a member of NATO, at least the unoccupied territories of Ukraine, as part of a negotiated settlement?
I guess all NATO members agree that Ukraine will be a member in NATO in the future, and we do share that ideal.
When you say in the future, do you mean, would you be supportive if that came onto the table for the next 10 years, for example, or would you be a little bit less hesitant in relation to that?
I think what comes to Ukraine's future, it is first and foremost Ukraine who decides, and especially if we're talking anything in relation to any possible negotiations, it is very much up to Ukraine to decide when the timing is and also what are the items on the table. Those items, of course, concerning Ukraine. But what comes to NATO, I would definitely see that going forward, Ukraine will be a very important member to NATO as well. And Ukraine is one of the unfortunate European countries who recently has had and has been forced to militarily defend itself. So it really has collected a lot of experience, if you will, which of course it is also already now sharing with the alliance, since it knows that its future is within NATO. But it will be a very important member in NATO also when the day arrives.
Are you worried about the future of Ukraine, particularly because there appears to be some sort of Ukraine fatigue at times amongst civilians and citizens in member states, because they feel maybe the defence budgets are taking away from health and education and so on?
I find it difficult to deal with that sort of complacency. I was in Kiev just last week, and I didn't see fatigue. I saw sadness, really, in so many eyes. And I don't think that all people in Europe, even though perhaps more than we realized just some 3 years ago, have realized that this really concerns all of us. And it is not just Ukraine, and even if it was just Ukraine, right, also Ukraine has the right to remain sovereign and to keep its territory as it is, because otherwise we don't have the UN Charter. And if we don't have the UN Charter and those international laws and obligations and rights, then we might face all sorts of threats in the future without any really, defense on our side. So I hope every man and woman on the street, and of course it's the politicians whose responsibility is also to tell their people what this is about. This is what it's about.
In relation to the future of international law, what then is your impression of Donald Trump saying that he would like to take over Greenland?
I'm pretty sure that in the case of upcoming President Trump, like we've experienced before, you have to distinguish between his way of speaking and also his true intentions. Having said that, I'm sure that what really lies behind his thinking is perhaps the increased emphasis on the Arctic, which we can only share because we have experienced, especially over the course of the past 10 years, that there's been increased activity. And now, of course, due to the climate change as well, the Arctic is becoming ever so important. So as an alliance, we should also be paying so much more focus on Arctic security, which actually we have been doing, and enhancing our capabilities within NATO as well, especially in the past 3 years. So I think now that the United States is also very much focused on that, it's only a good thing. And it's a good thing also that Greenland is part of Denmark, and Denmark is in NATO. So collectively, again, we can do so much more.
So there is cover for Greenland through Denmark as a member of NATO?
Precisely.
Just final question, Minister. For the next coming years, are you concerned about this war in Ukraine and how it's going to impact Europe with the complacency that we've seen a little bit of throughout Europe? I mean, as I mentioned there, Mark Rutte saying we're safe now, but in 4 or 5 years, if we don't act, we won't be.
Of course, we have to act, but I'm looking actually quite positively into the future, and I'm pretty optimistic in the end. And the reason is that if people are given the right to choose, everybody chooses freedom. Everybody chooses to live in a place like, say, Finland or the UK or wherever, where you can really make your own choices in your own life. And of course, autocracies and those autocratic leaders, dictators like Putin, they work out of self-interest. But all autocracies, all dictatorships will come to an end at some point. We saw that in Syria just the other day. We just need to make sure that the people after have a choice.
Okay, Minister Valtonen, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you so much.